Good old vinegar for cleanup. Piece of scratch paper with a pin. The new parts, these are the old parts obviously. The new parts. Flat screwdriver, Phillips screwdriver, forceps. Optional, you can use needle nose pliers. The diagonal pliers, wire cutters, were just to cut the tape. A Sharpie to mark our shutoff valves, an adjustable wrench, some thread locker, a new seat and springs kit for Delta, and then of course our electrical tape or RP so we don't mess up the finish on those threads. So this is what we're starting with our project with. This is the tools that I used, and good luck. Cold water, and I put a Sharpie to know what direction, and then I will count how many times to shut off the water. And the other side as well. There's a Sharpie, and then I just marked it just as there, and then I have a diagram. Here's my diagram here. I counted 3.5 for cold to stop, and 3 3/4 for hot to stop. And then I will, once we turn the water back on, take it 3 3/4 out for hot, and about at that angle, about the 1/130 position, and then likewise 3.5 for cold, about 1/130 position. It is dripping. Confirm that it's wet in the basin there, and so we're going to replace the cartridges. So before that, what I usually like to do is put the stopper up, and then I like to put a rag so I don't lose any parts. And then let's go ahead and take off the caps. We'll go ahead and take off the... So usually these are just a little screwdriver. We'll go ahead and pop these caps off here, or your thumb, or your fingernail. You can just pop them off. And then I set these aside. And then that's going to be a Phillips. Basically we'll just unscrew that there. And you have to push down a little bit. And this should just wiggle out. Should. Just like that. Pulls off. I'm going to set this aside. Going to set this aside. And we got a wrench here. What I want to do is I want to wrap tape around this here, so we don't mess up the threads. So I wrap tape around it, and these are just comes off ever so slight like that. It doesn't take a lot of force, and we can take the tape off and just set that aside. It doesn't take a lot of force. We'll set that aside too, and these just wiggle out. Just wiggling it and then pulling up a little bit. Sometimes just gently take a screwdriver and take it out, just gently, just to break the seal. There we go. And these are hard to find. I had to go to several Lowe's and several Home Depots to find this. So I would recommend, if you can order these online instead of making a million trips all around town and getting the right part number. So I believe this is the Delta RP1740. And this one looks good. It's a little worn. It's a little worn here, and maybe there's a little bit of, we can also replace the seats and springs, but this is the cartridge. You can rebuild these, but we're just going to go ahead and put a new cartridge in there. So the seat and springs, we're just going to pop this out. I'm going to set that aside, and again, these were hard to find. This is 80704, and these were hard to find, so I'm not quite sure if this is the right one, but I had to go to several Home Depots and Lowe's to find this. So we're going to compare it. This is the old one here. That's the old one, and I usually like to inspect it. We got a little on the rubber there. Looks like it's worn, so we're going to go ahead and replace it here. So yeah, here's the old one. The spring just pops out, and then the big end goes like that. So that's the old one. Can definitely see some marring. That's the new one, so I'm not sure. Let's go ahead and test it out. This one doesn't have a size. Both sides are about the same, so we're going to go ahead and then I just push it down with my finger. So I just pushed this in and used these forceps and pushed it in. And I'm not sure. Pushed it in with my finger. It should pop up, so this is what we're looking like. So yeah, so I went ahead and pushed that in with my finger, but you want to, it's not going to be flush. It's hard to see, but it's not going to be flush with the bottom of that basin up, because the spring tension is going to push it down on the cartridge. So if you put your finger in there, you're going to feel it's going to be about 1/8 to 1/16 of an inch above the bottom of the brass mounting. And the stops, so there's notches. There's a notch here and on each side, and then the notch for the you just want to confirm that these are the same. They look the same. It seems like the Delta cartridges are pretty common. Yeah, they're up with the notch in the faucet there. You just set it down and push it down. And then we have our nut that we're going to put on. And obviously start it finger to finger, start it by hand. And then I'm going to just put my tape around it just to snug it up, just so that I don't mess up the threads with my wrench. And we're using a crescent wrench here, but again, you don't need to be super tight on this. just snug, but I don't want to mess up the I'd say maybe 5 foot-pounds. Don't have to be super tight. Move our old spring out of the way, and then take our tape off. This is just to protect the threads. And then put our cap on. It's going to be grooved. So the flat side on that groove, I'm going to take the spring out for a second. The flat side will go on the flat, there's a flat side of this, and it'll go on the flat side of, and it just pushes down, and then we have our screw. And because this is plastic threads, I'm going to make sure it sits okay. And we just thread this back in there. And this doesn't have to be super tight, just snug. No, maybe 5 foot-pounds tops. Testing it out. Make sure it's in the right orientation. And this is a little loose, so we can go ahead and put some Loctite on this here. And go ahead and put our button back on. Make sure it lines up straight. And just push it on. And then this. So we're going to go ahead and put some Loctite thread locker on these threads. Here. Love this stuff. Put some thread locker on these threads here. I'm fairly generous. I like the thread locker. And then make sure we have our end caps. This doesn't have to be super tight, just finger tight. So that replaces that side, and then now that's the cold. That's a good, make sure the stops are okay, it's a good travel. Seated okay. Now let's replace the hot. The hot, we just pop it off with our fingernail, and if you do need a little bit of motivation, a little screwdriver or a little knife, we'll pop this off, but usually I found if I just work it up with my fingernail, up screwdriver, and that screw, kind of have to put a little bit of force, not a ton. That aside, and then you know the same song and dance. Put some tape around this nut so we don't mess up the threads. Use a little adjustable wrench. And it's just enough to unloosen it. Doesn't have to be super tight. And then take our tape off. Tape's just for to protect the threads. And screw that out. Put that aside. And then this should just wiggle out. But if it doesn't, sometimes just very, very gently take a screwdriver and get underneath it. But sometimes I just work it out. Just rock it back and forth and pull up gently. And again, a screwdriver just to get underneath it. Or a blade of a knife, but sometimes you have to use a little bit of motivation, but and again, it doesn't have to be a ton of force. And then just work it out a little bit. Just want to be very careful so you don't mess up the brass housing when you use your screwdriver. That one was a little bit tough, and so the whole thing. So yeah, this is the. So I don't know if you can see here, But yeah, so there's some rubbing on that seat. So this part here, so yeah, we're going to replace the seat. So use our forceps. We're going to grab that little seat in the bottom there. You could probably use some needle nose pliers. And it just pops out with the spring. Pops out with the spring all in one. And we're going to reuse that spring because it looks like the kit spring doesn't have a nice bevel on it. Yeah, see that seat is messed up. So that's probably why it was leaking, because I'm turning it around and as you can see here, it's messed up. That's the old one, and of course the new one is nice and flat. So we'll just do the big end goes down, big end goes down. So that's the little package. Another tip, here's another tip, put it on the end of a screwdriver or whatever, but an end of a screwdriver, and then what you do is then you just push it down the hole. That's going to be a lot easier. And obviously you put the hole and then you just push around it with your finger. That might be a little easier to fit that in. Get to push it in that hole. That's an easy enough light. But I have about a 1/8 of an inch. So it's pushing up. The pressure of the spring is pushing up on it. And so we used either our screwdriver method, and then I pushed it in with my finger and a screwdriver to make sure it's seated correctly. So yeah, it looks like it's good, it's seated up correctly. And I'm not sure if this seat package, because this is a Peerless, and this is all they had at the parts store. Make sure to line up the keyed slot there and just push it down. It's going to rise up just a little bit just because that pressure of that little seat of that spring. And thread this on hand tight. And we'll use our tape so we don't mess up the threads. An adjustable wrench. And just tight enough. It doesn't have to be super, just snug. It doesn't have to be super tight. Remove our tape. This is actually a good time to wipe down the faucet there. I forgot to mention that with our good old vinegar. So here we're just going to clean this up. Using a toilet tissue, but you can use a rag or whatever. But I'm just a good time. I should have done the other side as well. Just going to clean this up. Just vinegar. I like it because it's safe on the environment. This was already pretty clean, but you want to leave it in better condition than when you started working on it. Put it in. And it's got to be, it's just, doesn't have to be super tight, just snug enough. And then I'm going to go ahead and just press it in here. I do want to make a note on the orientation of this. So I actually had it in backwards because here's the stops, and the stops line up in that cap there, and of course the flat end will meet here. So I actually had it in backwards. So, but you want to test your stops first before you screw it all the way down. So that looks good here. So it's stopping there, can't go any farther, and then it can't stop in there. So you want to test that first. So this is all ready to go. And then we just put our little screw. And a Phillips. And I just hold it. Well, it doesn't have to be super tight, but snug. Then put our little cap on. So H is facing up. Press it in. And then now let's go ahead and turn the water on and test it out. Like that. 3.5 to line up, and then 3 3/4 over here. Okay, now moment of truth. That was from the seat and spring. That's cold. That's shutty. Now let's try hot. Hot's looking good. And we'll check the drip. I usually just wait a little bit, and then as I'm cleaning up my tools, more condition than it was. So we're just a little rag of vinegar here. So we're just going to clean up. But yeah, so far it looks like it worked. So this is for the Peerless. Peerless is kind of a generic brand, and this is like a 20-plus-year-old faucet, and it looks like they all use the Delta cartridge. So hopefully this was helpful, and again, thanks for watching.